If you're okay, I'll just kick off. Because I don't think the people miss a bit of the intro.
Yes.
No one's going to die. Let's find my stuff here. Okay, first of all, I'm going to mute all. Okay, hello everyone. I got you all on mute for the moment. Welcome to this Able Muse Press authors reading. I'm your host, John Beaton, speaking from Vancouver Island off the west coast of Canada. This reading's made possible by Alex Pepple, or Alexander in full, but most people know him as Alex. He founded and edits the literary journal Able Muse. He also founded the associated Able Muse Press. Word Galaxy Press, which published the books we'll hear about tonight, is an Able Muse Press imprint. Alex also founded and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. In addition, he's an accomplished writer himself. His poetry and prose have been published in leading journals like American Arts Quarterly, Light, Measure, and many more. He edited and produced the Able Muse Anthology, a selection from the first decade plus of Able Muse poetry, and that work was praised as an important literary landmark by Dana Gioia, former chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. Please visit Alex's website, ablemuse.com. You'll find the anthology there, plus many wonderful books, including tonight's. You'll also be able to subscribe to the Able Muse Journal, submit to it, and participate in the Erratosphere workshop. I'm now going to pass you to Alex for some introductory remarks. And Alex, you need to unmute.
Yes. Thank you everyone for coming this evening, and it's a pleasure to see you for another Able Muse reading event. Especially thrilled at today's presentation because we're doing something a bit different from the usual, with co-authors presenting from the book they co-published, by which I mean James and Sid. So this is what I call an illustrated epic, because it's actually an epic poem, one poem in the book. And I'm also very pleased with another World Galaxy Press author reading, David Alpaugh. And he's also presenting something special, what he calls double title poems, which you will get a chance to experience during his presentation. So I hope you all enjoy the presentation, and take it away, John.
Okay, before we start, I'll mute everyone during the presentations, but you can unmute yourself to speak, or at the end of the presentations to applaud. Presenters, please unmute yourselves when it's your turn. We'll be dealing with two items tonight, as Alex said, a book of poetry by David Alpaugh, and a narrative told through collaboration between graphic artist James Kochalka and poet Sydney Lee. I'll introduce the authors, David by himself and James and Sydney jointly. They'll then discuss and present their work, and I'll ask a few questions at the end. Afterwards, we'll have an open Q&A. If you like, you can post questions and comments in the chat box, and we'll try to bring them in. Our first reader then, David Alpaugh, is a graduate of Rutgers University and the University of California. He teaches poetry for the U of C Berkeley Extension and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. His poetry has won awards. His poetry has won awards and appeared in journals such as Able Muse, the American Journal of Poetry, and Rattle. He hosted poetry readings in the Bay Area for 15 years, and he was a finalist for Poet Laureate of California. He's also multi-talented, having authored 3 voice plays, a musical drama, and essays, including several about poetry's evolution. As Alec mentioned, he's creator of a new form called a double title poem, and his DTs, that's double title, not delirium tremens, as he calls them, have appeared widely here in the UK, and we're going to hear more about them as he presents his book, Spooky Action at a Distance. Over to you, David.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, John. It's a pleasure to be reading for Word Galaxy. Um, my book is called Spooky Action at a Distance, and it is a collection of 81 of my DTs or double title poems. I'm going to put the first one up to share so you can kind of see how the form works. In a sense, I did not really invent this form. It just sort of happened. I just wrote a poem, and as I wrote the poem, it turned into this form, the double title poem. You can see that the poem is against four. It has two titles, an intro title and an exit title. But as I wrote this poem and got to the last line of the second stanza, the last word was for, F-O-R, and it looks so tiny there in 12-point type in relationship to looking up at the word against, because they seem to be connected. They seem to be responding to each other vis-a-vis the poem. And I felt that for deserved more standing, more weight, more position than it had. And just on an impulse, I took it and I brought it out of the stanza, made it the same size as the first title, and put it in the same position to the line of the stanza as the first title was. So, just a nonce form, but it was rattling around in my mind. And a few months later, I wrote another one, then another one. And I started to think, this has possibilities as a form. I did a little bit of tweaking. So the rules are, you have two 5-line stanzas. They can be metrical or open. That doesn't matter. And you have two titles. The first title states the theme or reads into the poem, and the second title, the stanza, reads out into that second stanza, which kind of has a conclusive feel. The titles must be one word only. And the only other two rules are that the first word in the second stanza, you can see it there, it's against, is the same always as the first title. And so it kind of reiterates the first title, and it's italicized to dramatize that. And in the last two lines, somewhere, there has to be a word or syllable that rhymes with the exit title. It could be positioned anywhere within those two lines. Here it's in the end position, door. So I started, I wrote 126 of these poems. I wrote this one in 2014. Over the next 4 years, wrote 126 of them and published quite a few of them. And when I came to putting together a collection of 81 that became Spooky Action at a Distance, I thought that title from Albert Einstein was perfect for this book. Einstein was astonished at a quantum physics phenomenon that a particle, supposedly it could be as far away as one side of the universe, light years on the other side, two particles. They verified it up to 100 miles, but they theorized that it could go infinitely beyond that. That when something happened to the first particle, it made some kind of motion response. The other particle would be in synchronicity with it and would make a response after the first particle acted. And there was no physical reason for it. They couldn't find any reason for this conjunction. Spooky action at a distance. I don't think Einstein was too happy about it, but I think he came to accept it. So I think of these titles as particles, and sort of having spooky action across the poem, which is sort of like space. And so it seemed to be perfect for the book. So I'll read this first one, which is the very first poem that was written back in 2014. Against always makes the scariest face, always wields the bloodiest knife, strongest crowbar, bluntest battering ram, packs dirty bombs with raspiest nails, attaches nuclear warheads to emails. Against has season tickets to wherever Fans of the status quo gather en masse. Town halls, Senate chambers, churches, saloons. Against is the big bad wolf howling at the door to the little lambs within. Ba, ba-ing, for. Okay, if you notice, it's no, the poem is only 10 lines and 2 words. The sonnet is 14 lines, so it's kind of tighter and more terse than the sonnet. And the sonnet, of course, has that transition at the volta where you go from the octet into the sestet, and there's some kind of a transition going there. And I think the sonnet is perhaps better suited to grander themes, like love and time and aging and death. I mean, some of the greatest sonnets are in these large themes. This form, I think, is more vie de la quotidienne. It's much more contemporary friendly. And I also like it because I like humorous poetry. I like to write witty poems, and it seems to work for them. So going to stop the share here and read 9 or 10 poems from the book. I like short poems that take less than a page to print or to read. So I'll read both titles before reading the poem. This first one is the third poem in the book. Early poems tend to be about childhood experiences. Boulders, dumb. Boulders, ever rattling around in my head. Christ's boulder, rolled back from the tomb, the one that astonished. Sisyphus's boulder, which he can't quite roll up to the top of the hill, the one that hurts. Agates, cat's eyes, micas, steelies, tumbling out of cloth bags. Boulders that brought the whole neighborhood out when a circle was drawn in the dirt. The ones that delighted. Jesus wielded magic. Sisyphus, muscle. Howie, Bruce, Doris, and me, an opposing thumb, exploring the rotundity of marble. All of us struck dumb. Early school experience, sadism, truth. Sadism. On the last day of class, Miss Menifee called each fourth grader into the coat room for a private chat. When she said that I'd be staying back next year to work on penmanship, my eyes began to water. But I was just one victim of her sadism that day. She lied to 25 of 26 pupils, relishing our distress, till, don't cry, you're not really staying back. I wonder about that boy who had to repeat fourth grade, Andy Booth. Did Menifee get a kick out of telling him the truth? This one's entitled Lorna Forgotten. Lorna Margolin was our upstairs tenant in Plainfield, New Jersey, paid $28 rent, which she earned as a clerk at Macy's. A widow, her only son Jack died in World War II. Though I always said Mrs. Margolin, I'd fetch her mail, so knew her name, Lorna. Once when I thought she wasn't looking, I stuck my tongue out at her. She saw me and I had to apologize. I'm sorry I stuck my tongue out, Mrs. Margolin. I felt bad then. As this line gutters, I feel rotten. Outside this poem, Lorna is forgotten. Moment past. Moment. The next haiku poet who urges me to seize it gets a one-way ticket to Pleasure Island. There aren't any tongs or clamps or calipers that can grab and hold that will-o'-the-wisp for a humongous second, let alone a teensy moment. Take a look at me. Be advised that what you see is not me now, but me some time ago. A bright star you admire tonight might already be a black hole. Seize the moment. No one's ever that fast. Relax and enjoy your past. Kissing, sad. Kissing. Only 46% of our world cultures enjoy this phenomenon. The majority bored or repulsed by oral contact. In Europe, 1%ers were the innovators as kings and queens and courtiers tried kissing. Commoners, always eager to ape the antics of their oppressors, gave it a try, found it good, and kissing became the fad. In case you think I'm mad, I read this in National Geographic. For that 54%, I feel sad. Selfie here. Selfie. Narcissus was the entrepreneur. I have to stop here. Entrepreneur, rhymes with manure and sewer. Narcissus was the entrepreneur who tried to take one first. But photography being in its infancy, his underwater camera did him in. Still, the out-of-focus image that thrilled Narcissus was our species' first attempt at a selfie. Thus began our war on ephemerality that continues to this day, that Shakespeare fought with his sonnets. Millions via photos they display. Horton's who said it for us all, soft and clear. We are here, we are here, we are here. Okay. Never again. Never. If you're old enough to have watched Shoah, maybe even clips of the Nuremberg trials, shared Elie Wiesel's night, woke to Salon's black milk of daylight, wept over the diary of a young girl, then, like me, you promised never again. In Aleppo, white helmets searched the rubble for moving arms, legs, fingers. Paris, London, Brussels, San Bernardino, our century's rough beast has no den. Reread Anne's diary, still okay to cry, but not to repeat that lie, never again. Track walker, track walker. You go down into the subway after midnight when there's nobody on the platform. Ease yourself onto the tracks. Enter the dimly lit tunnel under the sleeping city, well aware of what'll happen should you touch that third rail. Track walker, your woods, you're acquainted with the night, your danger, a tad too young to fight our last war. Thrilling to feel the rails shake, see that light up ahead. Will blind luck have your back as you leap to the opposite track? See how I'm doing on time, maybe 2 or 3 more. Chase, place, chase. No way we'll catch the sun. Our planet spinning faster than Southwest can fly us back to Oakland. Darkness will fall before we arrive. Still, clouds have yet to redden, and it's a real hoot to root for our Red Baron pilot, no matter how quixotic his chase. 6 miles high, I feel like the poet in You, Andrew Marvell, Catching Light's Disappearing Act, although Archie didn't wear Bluetooth earbuds. Fly, ever so fast. Not even falcons win this race. As Heifetz plays Claire de Lune, I lose it in a lofty place. Past died. Past. I'm about to send one of those shattering emails. A mutual friend has passed away. But it isn't that a smiley-faced euphemism for what brain cancer did to Jim? Lucky him, off on a holiday cruise or excursion, passed like a ship in the night. Now with bikini babes on the Riviera or ziplining Kauai. A knockout word for what occurred spars with my rope-a-dope attempt to hide the bell-ringing fact. Another old friend has died. I'm not going to close with downsizing, unravel. Downsizing is on our minds more and more these days. I'm tired of plucking weeds and cleaning gutters. Our nest long empty, why do we need 5 bedrooms? One Dunn says is a veritable everywhere. Surely we can bear downsizing to 3. A den for you, a den for me. As to the bed's feet, life is shrunk. No mortgage payment, plenty of cash for travel. So why did we spring for this plush Persian rug? Maybe we're not yet ready to unravel. Spooky action at a distance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. That was excellent. Some of my favorites in there. Did Mrs. Menifee really do that? Miss Menifee and sadism.
That wasn't her name, actually. What was really interesting that everybody loved that teacher. She was a young teacher. She was very nice, and it was out of character. But yeah, she really did it to me. I'm theorizing that she did it to everybody else who went in, but she did it to me.
I'm a bit of a fisherman, and I'm quite used to stretching the truth a little bit. You know, never let the truth stand in the way of a good story, but it's excellent, excellently done, and definitely sadistic. You're going to have to repeat. No, you're not. Haha. But yeah, congratulations on the forum. I mean, the forum is really cool. It reminds me of stories that begin with a theme and then end by coming back to that theme and sort of closing the circle. And with that double title forum, I mean, sometimes when you close a circle, you've forgotten what happened at the start, and it's a sort of weak way to end. But with the double title, it's very emphatic, the connection across the full distance of the poem. Like, it's not quite light years, but it's a long way poem-wise. Works very good. And I like the way that you related to Einstein's phrase, which is kind of perfect. You describe it as a blend between fixed and open forms. And, you know, given that sort of free verse and formal verse keep jostling for position, that's a nice middle ground for a lot of poets. do you see it as, you've used open and fixed forms. Do you see that as the same as formal versus free verse, or is it something different?
Well, it's a fixed form in that it has certain rules. I sometimes write in meter. More often, I would say I write by what I've never been able to quite figure out what William Carlos Williams meant by the variable foot. But I compose by the foot. In other words, I am putting iambs, basically anapes, trochees, and spondees together, and there's no slack between them. And I've observed that in a lot of poets that are writing not in strict meter, that they are still understanding that the different feet have very different effects. I mean, the anapes lilts and moves you around, the spondee and dells, the iamb moves you upwards, the trochee moves you downwards. And so I always scan my poems at the end and make some adjustments and substitutions as a result. Not sure whether that answers your question or not.
No, that's good. You've got quite a variety of material in your poems. Like in the first few poems alone, you mentioned Lagavulin. I visited the Eiley distillery a few years ago. Zagnut, Kids Marbles, Sisyphus, Jesus, Harambe the gorilla, and by allusion, Trump and Putin, the president, that president who saw a kindred soul in KGB eyes, and most surprising of all, Hellagrammites, something I thought only fishermen and entomologists knew about. Yeah, formidable beasties.
The bass loved Hellagrammites. We fished with them. My father and I we get them in streams,
yeah,
rocks, and they'd be under the rocks. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you organize a book, like with such a variety of material? How did you select and arrange the poems?
Well, there are a number of themes that I think are running through the book. One is what Chaucer would call Dame Fortune, and I would just call luck. And there's a lot of luck throughout the poem. There's a dog who gets hit by a truck, and one of the final poems is about throwing all the poems down the stairs and just letting them arrange themselves randomly, which is obviously not true. That's not the way the book was arranged. But as the poems face each other on page spreads, I usually try to put them together so they make some sense. There are two political poems here, Conversation, and on the other side is Poverty, and they kind of speak to each other. And I do that on almost all of the page spreads. And then I have fun with spooky action at a real distance, where sometimes I'll have a poem on page 3 and a poem on page 62, and they will be speaking to each other. So the kind of arc that I'm building there.
Okay, well, I think that takes us to our time for this part of it. So thank you very much. I invite everyone to unmute, clap, and then mute again.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
That was great stuff.
Okay, moving on then. The next item involves two people, as we've said, called The Exquisite Triumph of Wormboy. And they're James and Sydney. James Kochalka is the author and illustrator of more than 40 graphic novels. He's achieved major distinctions in the world of comics, including 2 Eisner Awards, 1 Harvey Award, and 4 Ignatz Awards. Names I don't recognize, but which I understand are really big deals. In 2011, he was named First Cartoonist Laureate of Vermont. He also has a separate career as a rock star, believe it or not, performing with his band James Kochalka Superstar. In 2007, Rolling Stone named his song Britney's Silver Can one of the 100 best songs of the year. And second person, our poet, is Sidney Lee. He's founding editor of the New England Review. He's an author of 13 volumes of poetry, a former Vermont Poet Laureate and Pulitzer finalist. He's also published a novel, a collection of literary criticism, and 4 volumes of personal essays. His work has appeared in literary journals and magazines, including The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, and Sports Illustrated. He's taught liberal studies all over the place: Dartmouth College, Yale University, Wesleyan University, Vermont College, Middlebury College, Franklin University, Switzerland, and the National Hungarian University. So we'll begin with opening remarks from each of them about their project and their approaches to it. Then we'll examine the work with James introducing the pictures and Sydney reading the poetry, and we'll have screen share for that. And they'll close by commenting on the collaboration process, and I'll ask some questions afterwards. So take it away, James.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Our collaboration started because I'm good friends with Sid's son, Creston. And Creston plays in my rock band, James Kochalka Superstar. And Creston's also a writer. And I went to see Sid do readings when he would come to town. And I always thought his work was fantastic. And then we just happened to be named laureates of Vermont at the same time. He was around the same time. He was named poet laureate, and I was named the first cartoonist laureate of Vermont. And so it wasn't even our idea at first to collaborate together. I think it was the Vermont Council on the Arts suggested it. And we did a group of short comics collected in like a chapbook kind of thing, which the Vermont Council for the Arts paid to print up and give a copy to every legislature, all the state legislators, which is such a weird thing. I don't know if they read them or threw them in the trash, but it was that's how our working together began. And after doing a few of these short things, and we also did some for the local newspaper here, 7 Days. And then after a while, I thought we need to make something big, something really epic. I don't know. I should let Sid talk a little. I think you're muted, Sid.
Okay. That's right. The geology of the project is as James described. But when I was thinking what I would say about the conception of Wormboy from my perspective, I was remembering a couple of things that James said during a radio interview when he said, first thing he said is that the story is complete without the text. Well, I kind of bristled a little bit. I didn't say anything about it. I bristled about that a little bit until he said something else, which the more I reflected on it, struck me as another instance of his genius. And that's not a word I use lightly. Believe me, I apply it to James advisedly. And he said that the text was my account of how I read the story. By the time, as James said, by the time we came to Wormboy, we'd already done a number of short collaborations, but our approach has always been, with one exception, the opposite of what you might expect. That is to say, he sent me a whole bunch of drawings, and then I set about trying to deliver some sort of coherent binding effect that would tie the stories together. My first response from the get-go was, it was, what the hell am I supposed to do with these? I mean, like a cat with a candle on her head and a seagull that wants to go fetch a star out of the sky, or
yeah, that's from a previous collaboration. Yeah,
a story with a leaf and a mushroom as principal characters, a human-sized lovelorn bat that lived on the roofs of Burlington, or in this case, the protagonist who's a worm with the head of a boy. You're kidding me, I can't. But you know, when the rubber hit the asphalt, the challenge of forging a poem from any of this apparently wacky material is pretty much the challenge of making any poem. That's to say, unless you're very different from me, your observations and actions and responses during the day are pretty much a jumble. You know, I think you get up and you make breakfast for the kids, and maybe you do a quick crossword on the puzzle on the toilet before you catch a bus to go to work, where you like some people and you're cross with them because they haven't paid back a loan, or you dislike somebody and you're polite to them because they're a nice person, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing makes any sense there. And the only thing is that you are the ones who have experienced it all. So if there's going to be any coherence, it's going to be because you're the one that noticed all that stuff. So in a sense, you know, that however apparently bizarre this material James sent to me, it was not that different conceptually from trying to forge any poem. You know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and so on, and see if you can make something out of it. And in fact, the effort is always doomed. You know, if it had not been doomed, there would have been one pre-Homeric poem, and then everybody would have given up poetry forever because it would have been done. But at the very start of the book, I asked that we pretend that we are gods, and of course, I'm really addressing myself. And just as I am when I emphasize the pretentiousness precisely of that, saying that our efforts at godlike language must always die in face of even elemental fact. And
I loved that line, and we will get to that soon when you actually read it, because the role that you play in the story is basically the omniscient narrator, right? Like, except that you're an ignorant omniscient narrator who doesn't sure they understand the story.
I'm omniscient. I'm omni-ignorant is better.
Yeah, omni-ignorant. You can see everything that's happening,
exactly.
and then it's up to you to interpret it.
And the rhythms of the poem at large and the book at large, and from my perspective, it's really manic depressive. You know, at one point you say, well, you know, I'm trying to make sense of all this stuff and I'll never be able to do that. And on the other hand, you get a little jolt and say, well, you know, at least I'm moving upward. You know, it seems like I'm moving upward. That itself may be a delusion, who knows? But unless you think that the arc of your work is somehow upward to some extent, why would you waste most of what is, in my case, 78 years trying to be a poet, writing, looking to be definite about things that are indefinable, knowing that you will ultimately fail, that even the most eloquent language will die, as I say there at the start. So that's sort of what James was right in saying, yes, the poem part of the book, the text part of the book, is really a reflection on my reflection on the story as it's presented in the pictures.
Well, and I noticed that you know, if you gave the book to a child, they could read just the wordless comic and they could enjoy it. If they couldn't read your text, right, they could still basically understand what had happened in the story. And they would have to make some interpretations of their own, just as you made interpretations.
It's interesting because I have an immensely precocious 5-year-old grandson who's staying with us right now, who reads at about a 4th grade level, and he was given the book by his father. And when my younger son kept looking at him and looking at him, when he was finished, he said, well, what did you think of that? And he said, well, he said, you know, it's kind of sad, but it's also kind of happy. And I said, my God, he's got it. He gets it. So he gets the manic depressive component of being a poet. So they can be happy and sad at the same time, in a sense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap between comics and poetry. Really, all art forms overlap. You know, some of the more crass commercial forms maybe overlap less, but I think it's I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just think you can find threads of camaraderie with any artist.
No, I agree entirely.
Shall we begin reading? And because some of like talking about how we work and stuff, and a lot of what we've already said isn't going to make any sense to anybody if they don't see what this thing is that we created. So I will screen share. Beginning now. And if you would like to, I think a good idea, let me see. What I'm going to, I think I have to stop screen sharing just for a second. I think you should go in your Zoom, go full screen. If you're not full screen, this is for participants. Now I'll screen share. And I think now if you go to your,
if you go to view in the top right, you'll have options, and one that might be the best is side-by-side gallery or speaker. If you do speaker, you'll only see the speaker. If you do gallery, you'll see thumbprints of the other people.
Yeah, and if you do side-by-side, you'll see the speaker and the artwork. Okay, so this is the title page. The Exquisite Triumph of Wormboy. And we see it's winter and it's snowing. And then, whoops. Okay, so this is the first page of drawing, and it's paired with the first page of poetry. And we see the snow falling, and it's clumping up on the trees, weighing them down. They're getting heavier and heavier. Now, Sid, you ready to read?
Let's pretend that we are gods for this brief instant. We'll soon be robbed of that arrogant mystique, but for now, let's look down from our height on winter, which simple tongues describe as chill or bleak, or if they're simpler still, as frosty, icy, simple. Fake gods, after all, we should govern our hubris, unless we have keener means to describe that bleakness. Our efforts at godlike language must always die in face of even elemental fact. We may be reduced to blandly saying, it's winter. Winter with all its heft and long duration. Winter among the cruelest of nature's power. Winter, which calls the liveliest talk into question.
And here we see in the first panel, the snow-covered ground, and then the camera pulls back, as it were, and you see underground this strange worm boy asleep and snoring.
If indeed we did have godlike eyes, all-seeing and all-hearing ears, perhaps we might believe the quiet of Wormboy's den reflects his inner quiet. No restless rolling or tossing within his tiny earthen lair's space.
And there he is, tossing and turning.
Wormboy is a romantic, after all. He believes in correspondences between the grand exterior world and the inner soul. His inner one mostly, of course. And now within that soul, does it return? A certain dream?
Snoring.
Or rather an uncertain dream. We all can imagine evil correspondence as well as good, but the cruel and the benign, we can't choose one or the other consonants, or can we?
And now some time has passed, and the sun is shining, and you can see the snow is starting to melt and seep down into the earth. And here comes a drop towards the sleeping worm boy.
No more than a droplet. Thawed moisture from his burrow's ceiling plummets.
There it is. Hits him, and he wakes up, looks around. See, I don't need to say this.
And strikes
you can see it.
He pops to life. In that same moment, wetness multiplies as if the bees were in conspiracy. Conspiracy which dream may often enough imply. There is greater synchrony out there than most have ever dreamed. Yet all his tiny world in fact suggests is this: it must be spring at last.
It's getting a little too wet, so he starts up his burrow.
A change of place will alter things. Wormboy climbs from his self, half eager, half fearing what his hazy visions bode.
And there's the muddy earth, and Wormboy pops out.
He expects more struggle piercing through drenched springtime soil than he would have had in making his way through the feathery snow of January, which needless to say he doesn't recall at all. It's just that he's powerless to check his fancies. But there's no struggle, none in the least. Here's sudden daylight.
And I don't know why I drew him with his tongue out. I guess. But now 2 of his worm friends awaken from the earth too.
No wonder his burrow had gotten so humid. Sunlight has washed this ground around him with warmth that he feels along his unclenching body. And, surprise, his 2 friends, Muck and Flick, break through as well. An annual reunion, no less joy-laden for that. It's been too long for them all. The glee feels boundless. If the saying about how smiles light up a room did not exist, they'd have to dream it up. Though their gladness in each other could light up more than any room. Glad Wormboy, sure he feels them turn the warmth of the world to virtual heat.
And then they go for a stroll, and one notices a flower.
Heat, indeed. At once the 3 look up. A tulip, proud and fiery as some dimly remembered autumn tree or a beacon crucial to some old story.
And he's inspired to climb up. They've got an idea.
Without a word, his 2 friends now observe a vivid upward impulse. The very day seems to vibrate with their verve. What gives our Wormboy pause? Yes, why does he lag behind? He can't quite figure. Isn't Muck and Flick's delight in aiming so high at hand for Wormboy too? His chums bounce the flower stems and launch themselves up even farther. He cheers them on. The sound he makes a plain and simple vowel, but open, hearty. Then,
This is where it gets exciting.
Dark harness, and at first a mere shadow, then quickly an awful raptor's talons. Wormboy's lusty shouts turn into shrieks that are partly rueful. Did he dream this attack? Muck and Flick fade into a sky gone gray, it seems, in an instant. Wormboy, dizzy with grief, careens and falls. Or does he fling himself? Who knows? A frightful question penetrates his being. Was there something in his winter dream that caused his dear friend's rapture? Nonsense, he thinks, although good Muck and Flick, forever gone, he chokes on his own racking, catastrophic weeping. Or are they finally really and truly gone? Wormboy sees the awesome raptor sinking to a distant tree, still zealously gripping his friends. The bird will make a quick meal of them. I state this not unkindly, only as fact. Our hero doesn't like facts, but there's clearly nothing he can do to save poor Muck and Flick. He lies there still, all sorrow and unaccountable guilt. But his mind's a merry-go-round. In the midst of his despair, there's something that falls upon him, hope. It's as if the soaring evening stars were somehow laying down a mantle of warmth. He feels it along his abject length. No reason to think so, but there may be something he can do. That same far tree emits a sudden gleam, hot white. It flares his way exactly, or so it feels, like a searchlight. By now, our Wormboy is less certain than ever of what he sees, or thinks he sees, or dreams he sees, or simply dreams. That brightness, whatever it is, would make a day of night. No time for now to ponder. It's like a magnet, that gleam. Not at all that he doesn't hesitate. But it's not, as I say, to ponder. There's some mysterious battle in Wormboy, constant, not a matter of will. No matter, he'll fare yonder. So much effort is not to be wasted. This may be a fool's errand, but he'll cross this water somehow. Dear friends are waiting. Dear, dear friends are waiting. Dear, 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 the friends who are waiting, aren't they? Dear reader, do not assume that Wormboy, who, yes, must all but eat the dust merely in order to travel, don't imagine him incapable of elevated thought. Don't doubt his cultivated mind.
That's why I drew him with his tongue out before, because he had to eat his way out of the dirt.
Right. Good. Wormboy needs to conjure something to help him slough this shroud of fearful doubt with which the wide, wide water's very wideness has cloaked him here, at least for this moment. His cultivation now seems idle. No masterpiece in oil or bronze or stone, in stirring notes strung on a staff, in literature revered for ages. Nothing.
I think you're reading a different page.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
I'm not sure. You might be reading a different draft.
Oh dear.
I don't know, because the next what accompanies this page is yet here's a leaf, and here's a boat,
Oh, yeah.
and here's the cure for the chill of doubt.
I know you edited out some parts, and maybe I have the unedited version, because yet here's a leaf and here's a boat, and we may have edited out that other one. Yet here's a leaf and here's a boat, and here's the cure for the chill of doubt. Why should not hope, however odd, be just as strong, no, stronger than God's? Coincident, so he prays this all means, is those God's way of staying unseen. Even each breath of wind seems to steer him right. God, is he just mused? Perhaps mere nature, though nature is not mere, nor is the distinction crystal clear. At all events, he's launched on the water, and it's still there, the light. And then, as the googly eyes of a water monster stare at him, all Wormboy's rosy fictions burst like bubbles. There's been a rhythm to Wormboy's day. Perhaps he thinks more calm than you might guess, a rhythm to his life, awake or sleeping. As his burrowed dream suggested, our categories of good and bad, our facile sorting of bright and dark, all that does nothing more than display our limited angles of vision. Oh, enough of the false philosophy. So Wormboy inwardly screams as old adages swim to mind. It seems like yesterday, time flies. And finally, of course, goodbye, cruel world. The wet Leviathan will inhale him like the breath of life. But now the fish, it seems less predator than what? It extends a dripping tongue, not as a menace, but a ramp, it appears. And Wormboy climbs, descends. Reader, forgive my own too rosy fictions. The water's pewter surface closes over our little hero, gone this time for certain. No metaphor, no wishful allegory, however artful, however tinged with nuance, however broad and searching its perspective, can save him now. He's simply done. My narrative at an end as well. Farewell. It was not only Wormboy who saw visions. I tried to ape the gods. I tried to know his destiny, for I believed in Wormboy. Believed, as Heraclitus once opined, that character is fate. That our champion man-child had the sort of character, precisely, that portended dramatic rescue of cherished muck and flick. The implacable black water has drowned all that. But what? No monster after all. The fish deposits Wormboy on the farther shore. He's on his way again. Praise be to something. Not only the ferry boat fish. The fish is gone, in fact, before our bravo can thank him. Is that what he'd have done? What else? What else? He doesn't know. He's nigh bewildered.
James, could I jump in here?
Sure.
This is great, but we're going to run out of time, and we're certainly not
absolutely.
Going to
So we're about 2/3 of the way to the book. I'm glad that we got at least to the first fake ending.
I just wanted to say
right here it seemed like that. Like it seems like the story's over, but then no, it keeps going. Okay,
it just seemed a good point to sort of stop since it's a happy note, like,
Yeah.
do you want to say anything about the rest of the story? I think we've covered collaboration up front about the rest of the story, and then we'll move into the Q&A.
Sure, I can say something about the rest of the story.
Sure.
Contact Alex and get him to send you the book. It's a very reasonable price. That was a joke, folks.
Well, it gets the stakes get higher and higher in this adventure, and it gets more really more ecstatic. And it's really it seems like a silly story, but it's a pretty intense meditation on mortality and the afterlife.
James has said it more tersely and more eloquently than I could. I think that's a good way of putting it all. He keeps going up and up and up and up, and it's never a conclusion. And at the very end, he's really soaring off the page, and we don't really quite know where, and neither does he. But
it ends on an ecstatic note, definitely of like pure joy, although you may be unsure of exactly what is happening.
Yep.
Okay,
which I imagine maybe death might be like. Hopefully.
That's a bit of a downer, James. But anyway, it ties in beautifully with your comment, Sydney, about keeping writing poetry, because you've got to feel you're keeping going upwards, or else there's no point to it. And I thought that presentation was wonderful. It's a great way of, I liked that, the side-by-side picture and the spoken word narration over it. And I liked the way you introduced it, sort of, because I wondered what the relationship between the pictures and the text was, and you explained it beautifully by saying it's the poetry's, well, first of all, the story is complete without the text, and secondly, that the poetry is the account of how you read the story. Before I ask specific questions, can I ask you if any of you have ever read, if either of you have read Jonathan Living's Seagull?
Oh, yes.
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 It's
I read the book. I read the book as a child, and I've reread it as an adult, and I watched the movie multiple times as a child. So that was, probably had a strong effect on me.
I wondered about that, but were you, how in sync were you with that? Because you've written a paper called "Craft is the Enemy," right?
Yes.
That was quite controversial, but pretty much said that perfection is something that's fine if you go for it, but you shouldn't let it to sort of stifle your current passion and inspiration. You should go with that too. But Jonathan Livingston's Seagull is all about this seagull who practices flying till he's pretty well perfect with it, and then goes up to supernatural levels. But so it'd be a bit different from that view of craft. But I think you've definitely got the edge on him, because if you're looking for altitude in your story, you're much better starting with a worm than a seagull.
That's right. He's got a more epic journey from the ground to the sky than the seagull does, who's already right there.
Right, and it reminded me about Pilgrim's Progress too. But James, starting with you, you said that it's complete without the text, and a young person could read it and get the story quite well. And I think you said one of your relatives did that, Sydney. But I found that when I read the book and the poetry together, the story came out really well through the pictures, but the poetry sort of added a lot of texture and extra layers to it. But then when I was sort of scanning through it again to remind myself of things, I just flicked through the drawings, and they were an incredible summary of the story. I got it without looking at the words at all. And I've seen that you like your cartoons, part of your style is to keep your cartoons simple. Can you comment on how that works? Because those drawings, they are simple, but they're truly memorable.
Well, thank you. I do think that if the drawing is kept simple, it lets the reader experience it more personally. And sometimes when there's lots of detail and like the skills of the artist are highly on display, I think it sets a barrier between the art and the reader. Maybe not in like looking at a painting, but in comics it does. And so I think the simple drawings allow a deeper emotion to enter the heart of the reader.
I want to comment on that a little bit, just from a personal perspective. You know, I'd known some of James's work because he had an online thing called American Elf, which was a self-spoofing, fun, engrossing.
It's my diary.
Yeah. We did our first collaboration, that little blob. I've even forgotten what we called that. You know, that little guy. That little.
The first thing we did maybe was it was the character Squiggle from my series Johnny Boo.
Right.
Yeah, and
at one point he's flying, walking, ambling, as it may be, by what I construed to be Lake Champlain in our state. And I called my wife over and I said, "Look at this drawing." And she said, "Yeah, that's amazing." And I said, "What do you think makes it amazing?" And she said, "Well, there are 2 or 3 lines in there to indicate the moonlight on moving water, but you get the whole picture. You just get the whole picture out of that very, very simple rendition." And I hope that's in sync with what James is talking about.
I think an important thing to bring up that people can't see from looking at the book is that you didn't see these pictures when you wrote it. I did pencil sketches, which were just bare pencil lines. So none of that deep black was in what you saw. You really just saw like something closer to handwriting, you know, like very, very rough drawings. I mean, the characters and setting was the same. It's just bare pencil line work instead of the fully inked drawing. So it's all there even on that level, although on that level, it doesn't quite look like, you know, something you'd want to publish. And I think the ink, you know, the inked version does add more emotional resonance, but you didn't have that to work from. So you really had to imagine what the pictures would look like when I finished them.
It did get us launched, and yes, no, that's a proper account. I had forgotten that, but in fact, that's right.
Yeah, when I looked at the pictures, then the poetry seemed to sort of add to the pictures in a way, and that sort of added layers, and it also made it more adult. When I saw the pictures alone, you know, you've called it Wormboy, not Worm Adult.
Right.
And the simplicity of the pictures might lead you to believe that it's directed at a young audience at first, but then you read the poetry and if you just looking at the pictures, you could get it too, but you realize that there are other layers there, and it really gets you thinking. And I think both of you probably bring in two thoughts come to mind: satire and religion. Satire, I think some of your work has it, James, right? Like the Britney Spears song has got a lot of Justin Timberlake in it.
Yes. Yeah, we repeat the name Justin Timberlake something like somebody counted it. I don't remember what it is, but like 157 times, or
Yeah.
So I don't remember the exact number.
And in a few places, the story's been described as mock epic rather than straight epic, graphic poem. And of course, James, you've got.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree that it's mock epic, but I'm fine with it being called that because, I mean, I really think it's sincere. I don't think.
I didn't really agree with it either, but I saw it crop up a few times in internet descriptions.
Epic of self-mockery to some degree.
And the other thing was,
well, no, I agree. So the mock epic part is, I understand where people say that because Sid doubts himself while telling the story, which is unusual for an epic.
Anyway, adding into that sort of religious ingredient, you've got the fairy fish that's very like Jonah's whale, and the pond could be like the Slough Despond in Pilgrim's Progress. The star they follow is Christmas, has Christmas connotations, and I can't help noting that the name of your band, James Kochalka Superstar, jumps right over any comic superhero allusions to echo Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yes, that is absolutely the inspiration for the name of my band, without a doubt.
So, as I say, I thought that that was religion was coming out in the poetry too, although not so much satire, but was behind in both your minds? I mean, you're talking about God, Sydney, and James, you're the superstar.
I mean, God's almost, as I say at one point, Vedic, Norse, or Greek, take your pick. There's an impulse to try and, there's an impulse to go to that higher level, I think is intrinsic even in the most irreligious of us. One of the things I did want to say that it may be of interest to you, John and Alex, and given the prevailing, let me call it the prevailing aesthetic of Able Muse, is that part and parcel of this whole struggle to make sense out of all this disparateness is, however unobviously, reflected in my effort in each section to find some formal pattern. There's a lot of rhyme and half rhyme. Some sections are in hexameter, some alternate pentameter and tetrameter, some are trimeter, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this constant kind of, well, what if I tried it this way? Or what if I tried it that way? You see what I'm saying? And that's part of the quote meaning of the book.
There's one sense the variation there.
There's one part I edited out where you referenced like a dozen works of classic literature. And I was like, this is just too much.
I know. I think, yeah. I remember.
I mean, it was all great stuff, but there wasn't room for it on the page.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our.
Every reference I made was completely adequate to the story, and also, as you pointed out, unnecessary. So I fought with you a lot less hard than I do with most editors. I'll put it that way. I think that James may be the best poetry editor I've ever had. That's it.
Well, we're coming to the end of this part of it, and we're going to have a general Q&A afterwards. But just to finish off this part, I've just got one facetious question for you. In the story, two of Wormboy's friends travel with him. His two friends travel with him up into space. If you were rewriting the story today, would you change them out for three friends called Musk, Bezos, and Bronson?
Oh my God.
A happy ending if I did.
Okay, we'll go to
they would have to satisfy me, but anyway.
Open virtual floor question and answer. Anyone from the floor like to comment or question? And please remember to unmute yourself if you are.
I always told my students there's no such thing as a dumb question.
some people might disagree with that.
Well, that was a little charitable, but you know, I always found that the students were afraid that if they didn't sound deep, they were afraid to ask a question like, well, who the hell's talking here? I don't understand. Where are we? I don't get it. You know, I mean, those things I think are basic and essential, but people sometimes are embarrassed because they seem too elemental or elementary.
Well, it definitely happens when you're trying to figure out Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay, if there are no more questions, if there are no questions from the floor, do you want to say anything in closing, Alex? Oh, you need to unmute.
I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this unique presentation from David, James, and Sid. And I hope you enjoyed what we had to bring to you. And I hope you'll be joining us again for another event which is coming up next month. I believe it's 21st, when we will have a reading from Marian Corbett, Matthew Buckley Smith, and Frank Olsen. So that should be another interesting event. So, and I should hope to have the video for this event in a day or so, where you can watch it at leisure, and those who are here can actually also enjoy it with us. So thank you again, everyone, and
Okay.
have a good time.
I'd just like to say in closing, thanks to Alex, thanks to Karina and anyone else who helped with this. And thanks very much to the presenters, because I thought they were great presentations and it's been fun to listen to them and discuss them. Thank you.
Oh, and I should add that thank you to our presenter, our host, John. He did a fantastic job and he did a great preparation for this, because not everyone does as much presentation and preparation as you've done. So kudos to you.
Yeah, it really was wonderful, John. I mean, I've done these things before. It's obvious the person doesn't even know what the book is, but you had excellent questions and comments and observations of, so thank you for that.
Thanks, it was fun.
It went much more smoothly than I feared at 3 o'clock this morning.
Yes.
Okay, bye everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.